Hello, everybody. I am Steve Wunsch, Regional Vice President of Sales for the Mountain Region for Knock. I'm also a 27-year veteran in the property management arena, and I am excited to welcome you back to Knock Talk, where we are shedding light on all things multifamily front office tech. In this episode, I'm so excited to introduce you to Mitch Wettig. Mitch is Knock's Director of Value Engineering, and he's joining me today to talk about multifamily operators' revenue strategies and how value creation is the key to managing through the entire market cycle. Mitch has spent over 4 years in the property management industry, has an incredible, unique perspective. Mitch, I'm so happy to talk with you today. Welcome. Can you tell us what it means to be a value engineer? I'm not so sure that many people on our audience have heard those terms before.
Yeah, well, hey, Steve, thanks for the intro. Yeah, value engineer, simply put, first and foremost, I sit between our product team and our sales team. I make sure sales can articulate and is well-versed in our product and integrations. And then I'm bringing back customer feedback and prospect feedback to our product team to make sure that we're working on the right things. And we're not only pushing Knock forward, but we're actually pushing multifamily as a whole forward. Now, the other side of the value engineering part, the part I'm most passionate about, is the value engineering. So if you think about a CRM or a lead management tool, there's a lot of hands. It's a very hands-on product. And the last thing we want to do is get in a tit for tat feature war between us and a competitor, because each platform is going to have their own ways of doing things.
Right.
What we know from data and the real value calculation and quantification that I like to do is looking at the hundreds of properties we have on our platform, hundreds of partners, and the millions of units we have, to really prove that Knock is a lease driver, it's a renewal instigator, and it is a marketing budget optimizer. And all three of those things create value. So when we can quantify that for our customers and show that Knock is a really good investment, that's the conversation that I like to have.
That's really cool. I love that. Just the whole idea of how do you bring value to that relationship, right?
Yep.
So Mitch, we're sitting here kind of looking at the second half of 2020. You're out there talking with multifamily operators, daily about creating a strategy that drives their NOI. What are you seeing and hearing with people evaluating technology for the multifamily space, specifically as it does relate to that NOI and creating value?
Yeah. So I think, in general, the goal is still the same. People are always going to look at NOI and creating asset value. But right now, I think the magnifying glass is on renewals, right? You've got 40 to 60%, depending on your churn rate, of next year's revenue already in your building. How do we keep them there? One of the biggest gaps I'm hearing from the market is a lack in tools and systems to help, create predictability for forecasting and exposure, and also not giving them enough lead time to market a unit that might be losing that renewal. So having answers and a tool that helps with both is going to be extremely important.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah, and you've been on site, so I'm curious to hear your experience of strategies or things that have worked in the past that would still be working now during COVID.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, most companies are looking to keep that delinquency below like that 2% mark or lower. And what I'm seeing and hearing from my peeps in the multifamily space is that people who can pay their rent are paying their rent. So in terms of how COVID has affected collections, I think we're in a good place. I've even heard a couple multifamily partners talk that they're actually beating the NMHC average collections for June. So, with all that's going on, I think that's a good sign. But even still, I think, operators are looking for other ways to impact their NOI. And I don't think there's anything that does a better job of that than putting a focus on renewals, keeping that back door closed. I've been really encouraging folks that, how they show up now in terms of resident communication and resident response, renewal strategies, even responding to leads or even responding to reviews.
Reviews and maintenance requests.
Yeah, it's going to influence whether or not somebody says yes to the dress again. So I think, your conversation around, finding that foundation for that renewal strategy. I love to hear that Knox got their magnifying glass on that right now. I think that's really amazing.
Yeah.
Mitch, why don't we shift gears here a little bit and put some focus on, how the resident and the prospect experience has changed. There's a lot more choice, and how even property management companies have been enabling flexibility for the front office. Do you think that the experience is going to be permanently changed, and will these choices stay around even in a post-COVID world once we get there?
Yeah, I think to answer it simply, yes, the change is here to stay. We've always wanted to meet the prospective renter where they are and give them options. That's sort of how our self-booked, touring was born. But if we back up to like start of this year, start of 2020, and ask some of our friends at Rently or Smart Rent or some of those self-guided tour platforms, I imagine for them it was harder to convince an owner to really remove their best sales agent from the picture, right? When they don't have that person on site that knows the neighborhood, that knows the views of the different units, that can really answer those in-depth questions and give that prospective renter just the self-guided experience. But now I think COVID has really forced the hand of a lot of them to adopt these new technologies and has really fast-tracked the adoption across. I mean, we see it all the time. And so I think the change is here to stay. And it's always going to be important for prospective residents to have options.
Yeah.
The other side of that, sorry, Steve, the other side of that is for the actual on-site teams. A lot of states are still have lockdown, right? They still can't go to the office. And so if you can't maintain that continuity of lead follow-up from home, then what's that going to do 3, 6, 9, 12 months from now when you're not getting the volume of leases that you would normally expect? Yeah, so having a platform that can really solve for both is going to be important.
You mentioned a couple of, Rently and
Smart Rent.
Smart Rent, yes. So there's a lot of options out there for people. How do you help advise an operator to look at how to create value from the solutions that are out there? I mean, there's so many tools and so little time. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of softwares and systems, as you mentioned, out there. And, some are solving bigger, larger, more complex problems, and some are solving one specific problem. And what is very important is to make sure that as you're adding these, I'm not going to call them a Band-Aid solution, but something that solves an immediate problem, that if you're not building that on a foundation that has an integration and has the data flowing seamlessly back and forth and doesn't affect the workflows of your on-site teams, then you're really not creating long-term value. One of the things I want to challenge those listening is that, if you've got that contract on your desk, really think about, what you're signing up for. Does it integrate really well? How is it going to affect the workflow of our on-site teams to make sure that, the full platform and the breadth of the systems that you create are all speaking to each other, because that ultimately is where the value comes. And that's the things that's going to keep the engine running in the long term.
That's great. Great advice. Very insightful. I hope for our listeners that you were able to glean some great strategy and advice out of this conversation. Mitch, thanks for your time. Great to have you here.
Yep. Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it.
You bet. And we will see you next time on Knock Talk.